It was an ordinary evening at the royal palace. The massive building, filled with centuries of history, stood silent as if holding its breath. Staff moved about, going about their duties with quiet precision while the royal family settled into their evening routines. One man, however, stood out amongst the others that night. He was a royal guard, tasked with one of the most delicate duties in the palace, ensuring the safety of the royal family and keeping their private spaces secure. His shift had started like any other. He had checked the gates, made his rounds, and stood watch over the various rooms and halls of the palace. Tonight, however, there was something that caught his attention: a small, inconspicuous wardrobe that belonged to the queen consort Camilla. It was a piece of furniture that few had seen but many had heard of. Hidden away behind a private door in the royal quarters, it was an area of the palace that wasn't frequently accessed by anyone outside of the royal family. There was a problem, though. The wardrobe, which was meant to remain locked, had malfunctioned. The lock had jammed, and no matter how much he tried, the door refused to budge. It wasn't the first time this had happened, but this time it felt different. As the guard stood there examining the lock, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The wardrobe, after all, was no ordinary piece of furniture. It wasn't just for clothes. It was home to royal garments, some of which were sacred, items that had witnessed history. With the malfunctioning lock causing a delay in the usual procedures, the guard decided to take matters into his own hands. The royal protocols were clear. Any obstruction or delay, no matter how small, should be reported immediately. However, there were times when acting on instinct and making quick decisions was necessary. The clock was ticking and the situation had to be resolved. He decided to force open the wardrobe, just enough to see what was inside and understand the situation. In that quiet moment, the guard didn't know it yet, but he was about to make a discovery that would change the course of his night, and perhaps his life. He hadn't expected what lay behind the wardrobe doors. As he pried open the old wooden doors, a cool draft filled the air. His eyes scanned the contents of the wardrobe, and at first, he thought he had simply disturbed a long-forgotten set of clothes. But something caught his eye. There, hanging in the corner, was a robe unlike any other he had seen before. The fabric shimmered faintly even in the dim light. It was a grand robe, draped with intricate designs and a quiet grandeur that stood apart from the rest of the garments around it. The guard's breath caught in his throat as he stepped closer to examine it. He knew immediately that this was no ordinary piece of clothing. It was regal, steeped in history. As his hands hovered over it, he realized that this wasn't just any robe. It was something far more significant. The sight of it made the guard's heart race. This was a discovery beyond anything he could have imagined. The robe had been kept hidden in Camilla's wardrobe for reasons he couldn't understand. He was now holding a part of royal history that hadn't been seen for years, and its significance was overwhelming. His mind raced as he tried to process the situation. Should he take the robe out of the wardrobe and notify someone? Or should he leave it where it was and report the broken lock? The choice wasn't easy. The guard was trained to follow protocol to the letter, but something about the robe made him pause. It was so much more than a simple piece of clothing. It represented the late Queen's reign, her legacy, and the history of the British monarchy itself. It was a piece of history that belonged to an era that had now passed. With his mind in a whirl, the guard quickly made a decision. He wouldn't touch the robe. Instead, he would notify his superior and let them decide what to do next. It was a decision that would prove to be both wise and necessary, but at that moment he wasn't sure how the situation would unfold. The robe, so fragile and yet so important, seemed to hold a secret, one that might be more complicated than anyone could have imagined. The guard carefully closed the wardrobe doors and stepped back. His heart was still pounding as he picked up the radio to call for assistance. As he waited for a response, he couldn't help but think about what he had just found. The robe wasn't just an artifact. It was a link to the past, to the history of the monarchy that stretched back for generations. Minutes passed, and soon a senior officer arrived at the scene. He was a man of few words, but his expression said everything the guard needed to know. The officer knew the significance of what had been discovered. He took one look at the wardrobe and the broken lock and immediately understood. The guard didn't need to say a word. The senior officer took charge of the situation, ordering the wardrobe to be secured and the discovery reported to the highest levels of authority. What happened next was a blur of activity. Within moments, a few key members of the royal household arrived at the scene. Among them were trusted servants, palace staff, and even a few family members who were immediately alerted to the discovery. Everyone was talking in hushed tones, trying to understand why the Queen's coronation robe had been hidden away in Camilla's wardrobe. It was clear that the robe was not meant to be seen by anyone, especially not like this. There were whispers that spread through the palace about why the robe had been stored there. Had it been intentionally kept hidden? Had Camilla known about it all along, or was it an accidental discovery? Was this some sort of royal secret, one that had been buried for years, now brought to light in an unexpected way? The speculation was only beginning. As the royal staff began to assess the situation, one thing became clear. The discovery of the coronation robe was more than just a simple wardrobe malfunction. It was a moment that would go down in history, not because of the wardrobe, but because of the secrets it had been hiding. What started as a routine evening had quickly transformed into something much larger. The royal guard, who had simply been doing his duty, was now at the center of a mystery that would change the course of the royal family's history. And in that moment, as the palace buzzed with the quiet urgency of the discovery, the guard couldn't help but wonder, what was the real story behind this robe? What had he just uncovered? And what would the royal family decide to do with the piece of history he had unknowingly uncovered? He had no answers, but the one thing he did know was this. His night was no longer going to be just another ordinary evening in the palace. The minutes felt like hours as the royal guard stood by, his heart still racing from the discovery. The senior officer, a man with years of experience in the palace, had swiftly taken control of the situation. The wardrobe, once a simple piece of furniture, now held a secret that no one had anticipated. The guard had not been prepared for what lay behind its doors, and as the palace staff began to gather, the sense of uncertainty grew heavier. The first to arrive was a trusted servant, someone who had worked within the palace for decades. She had been with the royal family through thick and thin, and knew the palace's history like the back of her hand. Her face, however, showed no recognition of the robe. She was taken aback, her usual composure faltering for a moment. The robe hanging in the wardrobe seemed to evoke something beyond mere curiosity. It was as though it had an energy of its own, a presence that filled the room. She glanced at the guard, her eyes questioning, searching for an explanation. But the guard remained silent, still processing everything. He could feel the weight of the robe's significance pressing down on him. He wasn't sure how to explain it, how to make sense of what had just unfolded. All he knew was that the robe was something far more important than anyone had expected. Soon, others arrived, including a few members of the royal family's inner circle. They were all whispered to, trying to understand what had happened. The robe had been hidden in the wardrobe for so long, and yet no one had thought to ask why. Camilla, who had always kept the wardrobe locked, had no idea that anyone would ever come across its contents. As the room filled with quiet chatter and hushed voices, one thing was certain: the discovery of the robe was no accident. The senior officer, who had remained composed through it all, spoke quietly to the servants and staff members. The discovery had to be kept under wraps. No word of it could leak to the public, at least not yet. The robe was a delicate piece of royal history, and its significance was far greater than anyone had realized. It was not just a memento of the Queen's reign. It was a symbol of the past, of the monarchy's power and grace. It was a moment frozen in time, and it could not be treated as just another. The officer, realizing the gravity of the situation, asked the guard to step aside. He needed to speak privately with the senior palace staff. The guard, still uncertain of what would happen next, reluctantly obeyed. He had done his part, but now it was up to those higher up the chain to decide how to handle the discovery. As the guard moved away from the scene, he found himself standing in the hallway, unable to shake the image of the robe from his mind. What had he just uncovered? Why had it been kept hidden all these years? The question gnawed at him, but he knew he wouldn't get answers until the royal family had been informed. While he waited, time seemed to crawl. The conversations within the room behind him continued, but it was impossible to make out what was being said. The palace, which had felt so calm just hours earlier, now felt tense, its atmosphere thick with anticipation. The guard wondered how long it would take for the story to reach the queen consort herself. After all, it was her wardrobe that had been tampered with, her belongings that had been disturbed. Inside the room, Camilla was already being briefed on the situation. Her expression was one of shock and disbelief. She had been alerted to the fact that the wardrobe had been forced open and that a royal artifact had been discovered. Camilla's personal connection to the late queen was a well-known fact. They had shared a deep bond, one that had spanned many years. But the discovery of the coronation robe was something entirely different. It was a symbol of that bond, a gift from the late queen, something. When Camilla finally entered the room, her eyes immediately fell on the robe. It was impossible not to notice it. The robe, though delicate and faded, still radiated an aura of regality. It was not just an article of clothing, but a piece of history. As Camilla stood there, she let out a deep sigh, her hand brushing over her forehead as if trying to steady herself. She turned to the senior officer who had been overseeing the situation. "I never thought it would come to this," she said softly. Her voice was steady, but there was an underlying sorrow to it. "This robe, it's not something I ever intended for anyone to find." The senior officer, sensing the depth of the situation, nodded solemnly. "We understand, Your Majesty. We will handle this with the utmost care. But the robe, it is of great historical importance. We cannot simply keep it hidden away. It deserves to be properly acknowledged." Camilla's eyes softened as she gazed at the robe. She could feel the weight of its history, the memories it held. She had always known it was there, safely tucked away, but never had she imagined that someone would uncover it. And yet the robe had its own story to tell, one that could not be ignored. She paused for a long moment before speaking again. "The robe was given to me by the late queen. It was a personal gift, something between the two of us. She entrusted me with it, and I promised to keep it hidden away from the public eye. It was never meant to be seen by anyone else." The room fell silent as the significance of her words sank in. The late queen, who had been a figure of grace and strength, had given this robe as a token of their relationship. It was a private moment, one that had been sealed away in Camilla's wardrobe for years. It was a reminder of the bond they shared, one that was deeper than the world ever knew. But now, that bond was at risk of being exposed to the world. The guard, who had merely done his duty, had unknowingly set off a chain of events that could no longer be undone. The robe, once hidden away in the royal wardrobe, was now a public mystery. Its presence in Camilla's personal space had already raised questions, and the royal staff knew that the situation had to be handled delicately. Camilla took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had always been a woman of grace, someone who knew how to handle delicate matters with care. But this discovery had caught her off guard. She had never anticipated that the robe would be found, let alone under these circumstances. In the following moments, the senior officer continued to speak with Camilla and the others present, offering suggestions on how to proceed. The robe would be secured, catalogued, and placed under the highest level of protection. No one outside of the royal family would be allowed to see it until the time was right. There would be no press conferences, no public announcements. The situation would remain a royal secret, for now. As the meeting came to a close, Camilla walked back to her quarters, her mind still heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. The discovery of the robe had unearthed emotions she hadn't expected to confront. It was a reminder of the past, a past that had shaped her and the royal family in ways they could never fully express. The guard, standing in the hallway, watched her leave. His thoughts were still clouded by the discovery, unsure of what it all meant. He had done his duty, but now the future was uncertain. What would the royal family do with the robe? Would it be kept hidden forever? Or would it be shared with the world? And what role would he play in the unfolding story? The tension in the air was palpable. No one knew what would come next. But one thing was clear. The discovery of the coronation robe was only the beginning of a much larger story. The days that followed the discovery of the coronation robe were filled with tension. The palace, usually bustling with activity, now seemed eerily quiet. The royal guard, still processing what had happened, found himself caught up in a situation far beyond anything he could have imagined. It was a delicate matter, one that required careful handling and the utmost discretion. The discovery of the robe had been kept a secret, but it was clear that the incident could not remain under wraps for much longer. The staff who had been involved in the discovery were sworn to silence, but word had already begun to spread through the palace. Whispers floated through the hallways and curious glances were exchanged behind closed doors. The robe, once a hidden treasure, had become the subject of royal intrigue. The guard, though still uncertain of his place in the unfolding drama, knew that the discovery had set in motion a chain of events that would forever change the course of his life. He had never expected to be part of something so momentous, and yet here he was, standing at the center of a mystery that was far bigger than he had anticipated. As time passed, the situation only grew more complex. The royal family, who had been initially caught off guard by the robe's discovery, began to discuss the next steps. Should they reveal the existence of the robe to the public? Should they keep it hidden, locked away in the palace forever? A secret between the royal family and the past. The late queen had given the robe to Camilla in a private moment, a personal gesture that held great meaning for both women. And yet now that personal bond was at risk. The discussions took place behind closed doors away from prying eyes. The guard, though not directly involved in the royal conversations, could sense the growing unease among the staff. There was a palpable tension in the air, a sense that something big was coming. No one knew for certain what the royal family would decide, but the speculation was constant. The robe had become a symbol of the past, a link to the late queen and to a time that many believed had passed. One evening, the guard was summoned to the royal quarters once again. His heart raced as he made his way through the palace, unsure of what to expect. When he arrived, he was greeted by a small group of royal staff, including the senior officer who had first responded to the discovery. The officer, as always, was calm and composed, but there was a certain seriousness in his eyes that the guard had never seen before. "You've been summoned here because of your involvement in the discovery of the robe," the senior officer said, his voice steady but grave. "We need to discuss the next steps." The guard nodded, his thoughts racing. He had no idea what the next steps would be, but he knew it would be something important. He had been a part of this story from the very beginning, and now he was being asked to take part in its resolution. The officer continued, "The royal family has decided that the robe should be kept a secret for now. It will not be revealed to the public, at least not in the immediate future. But we do need to address the questions that have arisen within the palace. Why was the robe hidden in Camilla's wardrobe? What does it mean for the family? And most importantly, how do we prevent this from becoming a scandal?" The guard listened carefully, his mind absorbing the weight of the conversation. The robe, it seemed, was more than just a relic of the past. It was a piece of royal history, and its discovery had the potential to unravel delicate family dynamics. If the wrong people found out, if the media caught wind of it, the consequences could be far-reaching. "We will need to keep this under wraps," the officer continued, "but we also need to ensure that everyone involved knows how to handle the situation. The robe is a delicate matter, and it must be treated with the utmost respect." The guard nodded, fully understanding the gravity of the situation. He had been trained to follow orders to protect the royal family and their secrets. But this was different. This wasn't just about security. This was about history, legacy, and the personal bonds that connected the royal family to the past. The robe was more than just a piece of clothing. It was a symbol of a time long gone, a time when the late queen had worn it as part of her coronation. It was a moment frozen in time, a reminder of her reign and the history that had shaped the monarchy. As the meeting continued, the guard began to realize just how deeply the robe had affected everyone involved. For Camilla, it was a personal connection to the late queen, a bond that had always been kept private. For the royal family, it was a reminder of the past, a past that they had worked hard to distance themselves from in the public eye. The robe, once a symbol of pride and strength, was now a symbol of something more complicated, a relationship that was personal, intimate, and private. The guard couldn't help but wonder what the future held for the robe. Would it remain hidden away, a secret between the royal family and the past? Or would it one day be revealed, perhaps to the world, as a symbol of the monarchy's enduring legacy? As the meeting came to a close, the officer turned to the guard. "You've been a part of this discovery, and you'll continue to be part of the story moving forward. But you must remember one thing. This is a matter of trust. The royal family has entrusted you with this secret, and we expect you to keep it. If anything leaks out, it will be a breach of trust that could have serious consequences." The guard nodded solemnly. He understood the weight of his responsibility. He had always been loyal to the royal family, but this was something entirely different. This was history, and history had a way of slipping through the cracks when no one was looking. As the guard left the meeting, he couldn't shake the feeling that things were changing. The robe, once a private relic, had become the center of a royal mystery. Its discovery had set in motion a series of events that no one could have predicted. The palace, which had once felt like a place of safety and tradition, now felt like a place on the edge of something much bigger. And the guard, once just a quiet observer of royal life, now found himself caught in a whirlwind of secrecy, history, and intrigue. The next few days were filled with uncertainty. The palace staff continued to go about their duties, but there was an underlying tension in the air. Everyone knew that something had changed, even if they didn't know exactly what it was. The royal family, too, was on edge. The discovery of the robe had raised more questions than it had answered, and as the days went by, the palace staff began to wonder, would the robe ever be seen again? Would it remain a secret, locked away in the royal quarters? Or would... As the guard stood outside the royal quarters, watching the palace staff move about their duties, he couldn't help but think about the future. He had been part of something that was far bigger than himself, something that could change the course of history. And as he looked toward the horizon, he knew that the story of the coronation robe was far from over. As the days turned into weeks, the mystery surrounding the coronation robe continued to weigh heavily on everyone involved. The palace staff remained on edge, each one carefully going about their duties, but all too aware of the secret that lingered within the royal quarters. The robe, once a private symbol of royal history, had become the center of an unspoken tension. It was something that could not be ignored, yet no one dared to speak openly of it. The question remained, what would be done with the robe? The royal family, though maintaining a facade of calm and composure, had been deeply affected by the discovery. The late Queen's gift to Camilla was not just a piece of clothing. It was a link to the past, a piece of history that could never be replicated. For Camilla, it was a personal connection to the Queen, a bond that had always remained private, away from the prying eyes of the public. Now, however, that connection had been exposed, and with it, the delicate balance between the royal family's past and present had shifted. It was a warm afternoon when the guard received an unexpected summons to the royal quarters. His heart raced as he made his way through the palace, wondering what was to come next. He had been a part of this story from the very beginning, but now he was no longer just an observer. He had become an integral part of the unfolding drama. The robe, though still hidden away, had taken on a life of its own, and its discovery had sparked a chain of events that no one could have foreseen. When the guard arrived, he was greeted by the senior officer, who had been the first to respond to the discovery of the robe. The officer's face was serious, his expression reflecting the gravity of the situation. He motioned for the guard to follow him into a small private room, where a few members of the royal staff were already gathered. The room was quiet, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. The guard could sense that something significant was about to happen. The officer cleared his throat before speaking. "You've been called here because of your involvement in the discovery of the coronation robe," the officer began, his voice steady but carrying a weight that was hard to ignore. "The royal family has decided that the robe can no longer be kept hidden. It is time for the world to know about it." The guard's heart skipped a beat. He had expected many things, but this was unexpected. The robe, the secret that had been locked away in the royal quarters for so long, was going to be revealed. He wasn't sure what to feel. Was this a good thing? A bad thing? The royal family had worked hard to maintain a certain image, and now all of that was at risk. "The decision has been made," the officer continued. "The robe will be publicly displayed as part of an upcoming exhibition showcasing royal history. It will be a chance for the public to connect with the monarchy's past, to see the symbols and artifacts that have shaped the family over the years. The robe will be featured prominently, a centerpiece of the exhibition." The guard's mind raced. The robe, the very item that had been hidden away for years, was going to be displayed for the world to see. He couldn't help but wonder what the late Queen would have thought about this decision. Would she have wanted this? Would Camilla? The robe had been a deeply personal gift, a symbol of their relationship, and now it was going to be put on display for everyone to admire. "We will need your help," the officer said, bringing the guard's attention back to the present. "You've been directly involved with the robe, and we trust you. We need you to assist with the preparations for the exhibition, To ensure that everything goes smoothly, you will be responsible for guarding the robe, ensuring that it remains secure and protected as it is moved into the public space. The guard nodded, though a sense of unease settled in his chest. His role in the royal family's security had always been clear. But this was different. He had never been tasked with guarding something so significant, something that held so much history. The pressure was overwhelming, but he knew that this was a responsibility he couldn't turn down. The next few days were filled with preparations. The robe was carefully removed from its hiding place and transported to a secure area where it would be kept until the exhibition. The guard, along with several other members of the royal staff, worked tirelessly to ensure that everything was in place. The robe was carefully examined, catalogued, and photographed, its intricate details captured for posterity. Every precaution was taken to protect the delicate fabric, ensuring that nothing would happen to it. As the day of the exhibition drew closer, the tension in the palace seemed to grow. The staff continued their work, but there was an underlying sense of unease that no one could shake. The robe, once a private relic, was now a symbol of public interest. The anticipation was palpable. What would the public think when they saw the coronation robe for the first time? How would they react to its significance? And, more importantly, how would the royal family respond? The night before the exhibition, the guard stood watch over the room where the robe was kept. He couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as he looked at the garment. It was more than just fabric and thread. It was a piece of history, a reminder of a time when the monarchy had been at the height of its power. The robe had been worn during the Queen's coronation, a moment that had marked the beginning of her reign. It had witnessed history, and now it was going to be part of the present. The next morning, the exhibition was unveiled to the public. The robe, displayed in a glass case, was the centerpiece of the event. The media was buzzing with excitement as people from all walks of life gathered to catch a glimpse of the royal artifact. The room was filled with admiration, awe, and respect. People marveled at the intricacy of the design, the rich history woven into every stitch. The robe was a reminder of the monarchy's enduring legacy, a legacy that had been passed down through generati. For Camilla, the experience was bittersweet. Seeing the robe on display brought back memories of the late Queen, of their shared moments together. She had always known that the robe was something special, but seeing it in the public eye made her realize just how much it had meant to her. It was no longer just a personal connection between the two women. It had become a symbol of the monarchy's past, a piece of history that could never be forgotten. As the exhibition continued, the guard watched from a distance, his duty to protect the robe never far from his mind. The public's fascination with the artifact was undeniable, but he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The robe was a symbol of something much larger than any one person. It was a symbol of the monarchy itself, and the attention it had drawn was both a blessing and a curse. For the royal family, the exhibition was a success. The public had embraced the coronation robe, and the attention it had garnered was proof of the enduring power of the monarchy. But behind the scenes, the guard knew that the story wasn't over. The robe, once hidden away in the royal quarters, had now become a part of the public's consciousness. Its significance had been revealed, and there was no going back. As the exhibition drew to a close, the guard stood once again before the robe, his thoughts a whirlwind of questions and emotions. What had been uncovered in the past few weeks was far more than just a piece of clothing. The coronation robe was a symbol of history, of personal connections, and of the enduring power of the royal family. It had been hidden away for years, but now it was out in the open, a part of the world's collective memory. And as the guard looked at the robe one last time, he knew that its story was far from finished. What the public had seen was only the beginning. The legacy of the robe and of the royal family would continue to unfold in ways that no one could predict. Months passed since the coronation robe had been revealed to the public. The exhibition had been a resounding success, attracting crowds from all over, fascinated by the royal history it represented. The robe, once hidden away in the royal quarters, had become a symbol of something far greater than anyone had anticipated. The royal family, though pleased with the success of the exhibition, couldn't shake the feeling that the robe had triggered a wave of questions that would never quite go away. For the royal guard, life had returned to its usual rhythm. Though things had shifted subtly, he was still on duty, still following the same routines, but now in the back of his mind, the robe was always there, lurking. He had seen firsthand how the discovery of the robe had changed things. It had started as a simple incident, an unexpected event that no one could have predicted. But it had grown into something much larger, a moment in history that would be talked about for years to come. The palace, once quiet and contained, now felt different. The staff, though still dedicated to their duties, seemed to move with a new sense of purpose, as if the discovery of the robe had stirred something within them. The royal family, too, had been affected. The public's fascination with the robe was undeniable, but so too was the lingering question of what it represented. It had been more than just a piece of clothing. It had been a symbol of a bond between two women, a connection that had remained private and intimate. Camilla, who had once kept the robe hidden away, now found herself grappling with the reality that it was no longer just hers. It had been placed on display for the world to see, and in doing so it had shifted from being a personal keepsake to a public artifact. For a time, Camilla had wondered if she had made the right decision. Should she have kept the robe hidden? Should she have maintained the secrecy of the bond it represented? But the exhibition had been successful, and the public had embraced the story behind the robe. Yet as time went on, it became clear that the robe was still far from being just a relic of the past. It was a symbol of a time when the monarchy was at its peak, when the queen had worn it with pride, a moment frozen in time. And now, in the hands of history, it seemed to take on new significance every day. The robe had a life of its own, one that continued to unfold. Even as the world moved on, one day the guard found himself standing once again before the robe. Though now it was carefully displayed in the royal vault, far from the public eye. It had been a while since the exhibition, but the attention it had received still lingered in the air. The robe had sparked something in the royal family, a recognition that the past could never truly be left behind. It was part of their legacy, a part of what made them who they were. The guard had been tasked with keeping a close eye on the robe, ensuring that it was preserved and protected. It was a quiet responsibility, one that he took seriously. The robe was not just a valuable artifact, it was a symbol of the monarchy's past, and he knew how important it was to safeguard it. There had been rumors about its future. Some suggested that it would eventually be put on display again, others that it would be kept in private hands. But whatever the future held, the robe's place in history was secured. As he stood in the quiet vault, the guard couldn't help but think about the larger meaning of the robe. It had been more than just a piece of clothing. It had been a part of a moment, a reflection of the connection between the Queen and Camilla. It was a reminder that the past could never be erased, no matter how much time passed. The robe would always be a part of that history, and in some ways it would always be a part of Camilla's story. In the weeks that followed, the guard found himself caught between his duty and his curiosity. He had witnessed the emotional impact the robe had had on Camilla, and he had seen how the royal family had been affected by the public's fascination with it. But now, as time moved forward, the robe seemed to slip into the background once again, as if it were merely a memory, a story told and retold. Yet for those who had been part of its discovery and its journey, it remained something more. One evening, as the sun set over the palace grounds, the senior officer approached the guard. He had a serious expression on his face, one that suggested he had something important to discuss. The guard stood at attention, waiting for the officer to speak. "The time has come for the robe to be displayed once more," the officer said. "But this time it will be in a different way. It will be part of a larger exhibition, one that focuses on the monarchy's entire history. This is not just about the robe. It's about telling the story of the royal family, of everything that has led us to this point." The guard nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. The robe would no longer just be a relic of the past. It would become a symbol of the royal family's legacy, a testament to the endurance of the monarchy through the years. It was no longer just about Camilla's connection to the late queen. It was about the monarchy itself, its history, and its place in the world. The preparations for the new exhibition were underway, and the guard found himself once again involved in the process. He had seen how the robe had become a part of the story, a link between generations of royalty. Now, as it prepared to be displayed in a new light, he couldn't help but wonder how it would be received this time. Would the public continue to see it as a symbol of the past, or Would it take on new significance in the modern world? The exhibition, once it was unveiled, was met with overwhelming support. People from all over the world came to see the robe, to marvel at its intricate design and to reflect on the history it represented. It was no longer just about the coronation of the late queen. It was about the royal family's enduring legacy, its ability to remain relevant in a changing world. The robe had become a symbol of continuity, a reminder that, despite everything that had happened, the monarchy was still standing strong. For the royal guard, the exhibition marked the end of a chapter in the story of the coronation robe. He had witnessed its journey from the royal wardrobe to the public eye, and he had seen how it had impacted everyone involved. It had been a moment in history, a part of the royal family's legacy, and now, it was something that would continue to be remembered for generations to come. As the exhibition came to a close and the robe was once again carefully secured in its resting place, the guard couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had been a part of something far larger than himself, something that would be remembered long after he was gone. The coronation robe had become more than just a symbol of the past. It had become a part of the future, a part of the royal family's ongoing story. And as he stood in the quiet of the royal vault, the guard knew that the robe's story was far from over. It would continue to be a part of history, a symbol of the monarchy's legacy, a reminder that the past, no matter how distant, could never truly be forgotten. Years passed since the coronation robe had first been displayed to the public. What began as an unexpected discovery had transformed into an enduring symbol of the monarchy's history, weaving together the past and present. As time went on, the robe's significance continued to evolve, its legacy growing with each passing day. The royal family had seen how the public's perception of them had shifted since the exhibition, how the once hidden relic had become a focal point for national pride and reflection. The guard, who had once stood by silently in the background, had become a quiet observer of this ongoing transformation. His role had always been to ensure the safety and security of the royal family, but over time, he had come to realize that the robe, much like the monarchy itself, had a power far beyond mere preservation. It had come to represent something intangible, something deeply tied to the very identity of the royal family. The public had embraced it, and with it, a renewed sense of respect for the monarchy as an institution. Despite this, the guard could not help but feel that there was more to the story, more that had yet to be uncovered. He often wondered what the late queen might have thought about the robe's newfound place in history. She had worn it with such pride, but would she have wanted it to be displayed so publicly? Would she have desired the world to know the bond she had shared with Camilla? Or was it meant to remain a private connection between the two? These questions lingered in his mind unanswered, like whispers of the past. Camilla, too, had struggled with the robe's journey. She had always valued the personal, quiet connection it represented, a link between her and the late queen. But as the robe became a symbol of the monarchy's enduring legacy, she found herself caught between a desire to protect its privacy and the reality that it was now a part of something much larger. Her feelings were complicated, and at times, she wondered if the robe's place in history was something she could ever fully accept. Yet, there were moments when Camilla stood in front of the display, gazing at the intricate stitching and the delicate fabric, and she felt a sense of peace. It was as if the robe had taken on a life of its own, no longer just a physical object, but a symbol of something more profound. It represented not only the late queen's reign, but also the continuity of the monarchy itself, a connection between generations that transcended time. The guard's thoughts often wandered to these complexities. He had seen firsthand the way the robe had affected Camilla and the royal family, how it had brought them closer to the public while simultaneously distancing them from their private selves. But it wasn't just the royal family who had been affected. The public's fascination with the robe had sparked an ongoing conversation about the monarchy, its place in the modern world, and the delicate balance between tradition and progress. It was during one of these quiet moments that the guard received an unexpected assignment. He was called into a meeting with the senior officer, the same officer who had guided him through the robe's earlier exhibitions. The officer's face was serious, his usual calm demeanor replaced by something more urgent. The guard immediately knew that something significant was unfolding. "We've received word from the royal family," the officer began. "The robe is to be moved again, this time for a very special occasion." The exhibition has been a great success, but the monarchy is preparing for something far grander. It is time to take the next step in the robe's legacy. The guard nodded, listening intently. He had always known that the robe's journey would continue, but he hadn't expected this. What could be grander than the previous exhibitions? What more could the royal family do to honor such a symbol? The exhibition will now be part of a major international event, the officer continued. It will be displayed alongside other royal artifacts from across the world, a celebration of monarchy, history, and culture. The idea is to take the legacy of the coronation robe and expand it, to show how it fits into the broader history of royal families throughout the centuries. The guard was taken aback. The robe, which had once been a quiet private symbol, would now be part of something far larger, a spectacle that would showcase not just the British monarchy, but the legacies of monarchies around the world. It was a bold move, one that would undoubtedly draw even more attention to the royal family and to the robe itself. "We need your help," the officer said, bringing the guard back to the present. "You will be part of the team responsible for overseeing the transport of the robe, ensuring its safety during this historic event. You will be traveling with it, guarding it at every step of the journey. This will be your most important assignment yet." The guard stood silently for a moment, processing the enormity of the task. He had always been a protector, a silent presence in the background, but this felt different. The robe was no longer just a symbol of the past. It was now a part of the future, an integral part of the royal family's continued place in the world. The pressure was immense, but the guard knew that he could not back down. This was his responsibility, and it was one he would carry out with the same dedication he had shown all these years. In the days that followed, preparations were made for the robe's transport. The guard was involved in every aspect of the process, from ensuring its security during the move to overseeing the special packaging that would protect it during the long journey. The robe was carefully packed into a specially designed case, its delicate fabric wrapped in protective layers to prevent any damage. The guard felt a sense of awe as he watched the preparations unfold. The robe was no longer just an artifact. It was a piece of history, a symbol of the monarchy's enduring power. As the day of the journey approached, the royal family remained deeply involved in the process. Camilla, though still conflicted about the robe's place in the public eye, was quietly supportive of the decision. She knew that the robe's journey was no longer just about her or the late queen. It was about something much larger. The monarchy was evolving, adapting to the changing world, and the robe was a part of that evolution. The journey itself was a carefully orchestrated affair, with multiple teams of security personnel assigned to ensure the robe's safe passage. The guard traveled alongside it, his every step taken with the knowledge that the eyes of the world would soon be upon them. As the robe was moved from one location to the next, the guard could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. The coronation robe was no longer just a physical object. It was a living, breathing part of the royal family's legacy. When the exhibition finally opened, the robe was once again displayed for the world to see. This time, however, it was part of a much larger event, one that showcased the history of monarchies across the globe. The exhibition was a resounding success, drawing visitors from every corner of the world. People marveled at the robe not just for its beauty, but for the history it represented. It was a reminder that the monarchy was not just a relic of the past, but a living institution, one that had endured through centuries of change. For the guard, it was a moment of reflection. He had been a part of something much larger than he had ever imagined, and as the exhibition came to a close, he knew that the robe's legacy would continue to unfold in ways that no one could predict. It had started as a simple private artifact, but it had become a symbol of continuity, tradition, and the ever-evolving nature of the monarchy itself. And as the journey continued, the guard stood silently by, knowing that his role was not just to protect the robe, but to ensure that its story, and the story of the monarchy, would be told for generations to come.